Anger is a healthy part of a normal human emotional spectrum. We are meant to get angry when something important to us is threatened. Like, for example, if our partner threatens our relationship through betrayal or infidelity. In fact, anger is not only healthy, but it is essential for transformation. But so often we don't handle it well. We either suppress our anger so it leaks, or we indulge our anger so we lash out. In this episode, we're going to be opening the vault on anger to show you exactly how to play it with your partner. From battles over bank balances to wars over the cutlery drawer, domestic life can be a minefield. Whether you're facing relationship-ending hurdles or you just need a bit more fun, Rewiring Love delivers the clinical tools of a couples therapist straight to your ears. Let's smooth out your journey. Hi, and welcome back to Rewiring Love. If it's your first time with us or you've joined us before, I'm so glad you're here. My name's Naomi Light, and I am a couples therapist and the host of this podcast. And if you're here and you can subscribe for the first time or give us a thumbs up for this episode, that means a lot to me and to the team. Everything we do here in Rewiring Love is to support you to have the kind of relationship that you signed up for, the kind of relationship you really want. So every time you rate the show or you like us, it genuinely helps us to do a better job of that. So I'm just fresh off the back of a 2-part mini-series on affair recovery. We were trying to create a kind of like grab bag of all of the tools and ideas you're going to need in the immediate aftermath of discovering that your partner's cheated, or there's been some major betrayal, and the whirlwind that you get thrown into. In those moments, we're trying to make sense of in this 2-part series. But what we needed to focus on, I felt it was really worth us doing a whole episode on how to handle anger, because it is such an important part of the process of recovering from infidelity or betrayal in your relationship, or even working out if you want to do that, or if there's anything left to recover. But anger and how to handle it is also an everyday experience for us in long-term committed relationships. When two people live their lives that close together, when they're so important to each other, of course there's going to be moments where tensions rise and anger flares. And of course you're going to get upset with your partner and you are going to upset them. But skills to handle that moment often are not intuitive, and they may not even be skills that we've had the opportunity to learn. So this, I thought, was a really important next step in our season 2 of this podcast, that we dedicated a whole week to thinking about how we handle anger. And as I like to do on the Rewiring Love podcast, I'm going to mix some of the clinical insights, the models I've been trained in, the theory behind this, attachment science, neuroscience, understanding processing emotions and understanding the kind of the bodily responses that are involved in cycles of emotion. Joining that with what I hope will be the most practical how-tos of literally, what do I do if I'm angry? How do I know if I'm angry? How am I going to not avoid this situation, but also not blow this situation out of all proportion? So I've got 5 things to think about, kind of in an order of 1 to 5. 5 steps, 5 considerations, 5 catches, 5 moments of connection with yourself to offer you. And it's the kind of thing that I know I've had to work really hard on each of these steps. These are hard-won insights in my own personal journey and in my relationship with my husband, and also conversations I have with my clients. This is straight out of our therapy conversations, where the minute-by-minute support that sometimes I can give to a couple in the heat of the moment literally changes not just the outcome of that conversation, but how they feel about the relationship and their sense of identity as belonging to a partnership that really matters and has really got future. So that's what's at stake here. So I hope you will find something useful in this episode. And I also hope that you will get hold of the resource that I've created. I thought it was worth me bundling up these 5 steps into a downloadable PDF worksheet that you could use as an accompaniment to this session or just as a standalone resource to work through on your own. So you want to grab that. It's in the show notes. Grab that, download it, print it off if you want to, make notes if you want to, share it with your partner or someone else that will find it helpful. And I'm starting from the premise in this episode that as a culture, as a society, we are not that great at handling anger. And that I'm speaking, as a white female, I think we're chronically bad at this. That often we find ourselves being conditioned, even just subtly and sometimes more overtly. I was raised in a household that was quite religious and where anger really wasn't modeled. And my interpretation was that anger was wrong. And it was an emotion that I suppressed and avoided for years. Hence all the work that I've tried to put into handling my own anger and managing it in my relationships. And I think that there is a whole spectrum of suppressing anger that is commonplace in our society, stiff upper lip, biting your tongue, holding it in and keeping the peace, looking after people. But then also I think there's a whole kind of swathes of people who may have had cultural experiences that aggrandize or glorify anger and have seen it modeled in a way that was destructive, but was also kind of like elevated or seen to be socially acceptable. And like things like, video game violence. So I'm thinking of kind of football hooliganism or just ways that people can be treated by others. And it's really socially laden with meaning for us all the time, especially when we're young. And so I kind of come at this podcast episode with the assumption, because I know it's true for me, that there's some unlearning I need to do. And there's actually some basic permissioning of myself to be an angry person at times that I think we need, and that it's such a powerful resource for us that it really deserves us to think again and to be brave and courageous about redefining what emotions are for us and what they mean for us, especially in relationships. And it's a common understanding that emotions in our body, their job is messengers. That we have emotions because we're trying to predict and ready ourselves to be able to respond to life. And emotions are often based on our templates from previous experiences and memories. The more significant the things that happen to us, whether positively or negatively, the more impactful those will be in our mind and in our memory. And when an emotion comes up in our body, whether that's relaxation or fear or excitement or rage, that it's our brain's best way of saying, okay, this is what I think you need. This is how to handle this. This is a way to show up in this situation. And literally the emotions that we feel are chemical markers in the body that are there to prepare us. And when it comes to anger, anger is a marker of boundary violation. So that means we feel anger when something important to us has been threatened, when our reputation's been challenged, when maybe a possession has been damaged or stolen, when an important principle that we hold dear or a value that we have has been denigrated or trampled on, when something that is of worth to us is threatened, then anger rises up in us as part of our fight-flight response in order to help us to deal with the situation and to preserve and protect our own lives and things around us that really matter to us. That's the purpose of anger in our bodies. And when it comes to relationships, the goal is not some kind of performative, artificial calm where, we never ruffle anyone's feathers and nobody ever gets hurt. It's actually, the goal is to be fully ourselves while staying connected to another human being, and being able to be fully expressed whilst also be fully accepting of the other person. And so anger is going to be so important in that dance that we do with each other to help us alert us and also our partner to the things that are important that need protecting. There's a really useful formula I like, which is that suffering equals pain times resistance. And in this episode, we're really talking about the pain of anger, the pain of threat or something being violated. And when we think of our emotions as normal signals and messengers in our body that are there for our good, that are there to help us and prepare us, we know that pain is part of life, and difficult emotions are not negative. They're not bad emotions. They are just more difficult for us to handle. And that's inevitable. Suffering comes when we resist the pain, when we say, oh, no, I shouldn't feel that, or you shouldn't be like that, or, well, that must mean you don't love me. How dare you? I feel so insulted. When we add to the primary emotion, in this case, anger, when we add to it our resistance, when we either block it or we amplify it, both of which are resistance, we're resisting actually really feeling it and letting ourselves understand what's behind that message, then we create suffering. The problems really start when we are in our own way to allow emotions to move through us and then move into our lives. When we block them or we resist them, that's when anger can become a force that's no longer helpful and constructive, but can be destructive to ourselves and to our relationships. And I've mentioned that I think there's two ways of resisting anger. And one is to block and the other one is to amplify. So blocking anger would be to bottle it up, to swallow it down, to suppress it, to ignore it, to even detach from it. And this minimizes our experience of anger, but it doesn't get rid of it. What tends to happen is anger will leak out in other ways. It may get transmitted through the energy around us, the atmosphere that someone carries, through our non-verbal communication, the tension in our body, the tone of our voice, the way our face looks. We could have an unfriendly expression on our face. People are very sensitive to that, particularly our loved ones, anyone who's attached to us. Or it might leak in other ways, that it might become something that creates pain or dis-ease in our body, and we carry it as a stress load in the background, not really realizing that that's anger that's been resisted and it's held in our body. And I think the other way we resist it is by indulging it, by overdoing it, by amplifying it. And this would be more where we've externalized that anger. So we might act it out or weaponize it and use it against our partner. We might use our anger as an excuse for criticism, contempt, saying mean things, just, being an arse. We've all got it within our capacity to be an arse. And often if we aren't aware of anger and we are blaming and projecting, then that anger is being amplified with us, and the suffering that's caused is because we haven't channeled anger well. We haven't actually allowed it. We have amplified it and used it to justify behaviors that are not good for us and not helping us or our relationship. So in this way, anger kind of comes with a bit of a health warning, in that it is a really effective and powerful resource in our body. It's an energy that can be used in so many good ways. I kind of think of activism or protest or disruptors who, see something that's wrong and do something to bring about a change. That often they're motivated by anger, by something valuable being threatened. And I think it can be such a powerful force for good. And that same energy translated well in our relationship can alert us to the changes we need to make to protect what needs protecting. And when it comes to amplifying our anger, if that maybe has been what you've had modeled to you, or it just is, your attachment style. You go, I like to call it a wave based on Stan Tatkin and Pact ideas about attachment systems. Often we overly rely on the externalizing of our emotions if we are in insecure wave-like behavior. I've done a whole episode on this about islands and waves, so do pick up on that if it would be helpful to understand more about attachment patterns. But where we've externalized and we've projected that onto our partner, what can happen in terms of like the impact of anger is that it will start to affect their nervous system and their sense of security and safety, and can trigger, the fight flight system in them. And then that's when it becomes combative, obviously, because the best form of defense is attack. So I feel angry about your angry outburst, and then we're off to the races. Anything goes, gloves off, the kind of conflict situation. Often means that people end up in my office trying to find a solution to escalating conflict. So that's just to kind of link anger with how it can kind of blow back on us, and to explain some of the power, the effective power, but also the potential for conflict that comes when we have what I like to call a primitive brain response, or, child brain response to a situation involving the emotion of anger, when what we need is an adult brain, or a ambassador brain response to anger. And that's what these 5 steps that I'm just about to teach you are going to help you conceptually understand. And then the more you repeat, obviously, neurons that fire together wire together in our brain. That's the law of neuroplasticity. So repeating this strengthens the connections in your brain to be able to do it with more ease and more confidence and more immediacy when you are experiencing anger. But just before we get into those 5 steps, there's one other concept that I thought would be really useful for you in expanding your understanding of your own anger, and that is of anger as an iceberg. Now, notoriously, defining emotion scientifically is quite difficult, because if you imagine that so many things, so many differences in human beings can play into what anger feels like or looks like, or even how chemically it's produced in the body. And scientists don't often agree on what the list of primary and secondary emotions are, and even how emotions get expressed. It's so nuanced to each individual human body and each individual human brain. But what I've found really helpful with working with clients is the idea that often anger is a secondary emotion, i.e., it isn't the first raw experience we have when something important is threatened. Often that's more likely to be fear or grief. So the idea that something is being lost or something is in danger of being attacked. And remember, this isn't a conscious thing. You're not consciously thinking, oh, I'm feeling that my partner might be going to attack me. You just get a rush of fear, and then that can sometimes flip into anger. And I think particularly when it comes to relationships, I'm just thinking about the work we've done on affair recovery, and how rage being triggered by reminders of the affair or by moments that feel similar, that is just such an understandable way for us to protect something that feels so vulnerable, so raw, and so sensitive. And so the iceberg concept is this idea that anger is what we see on the surface, but underneath the water, there may be so much more going on, that it may connect us with real primal experiences of, a sense of abandonment, or feeling that we're being disrespected, that we've failed, that we've not lived up to an expectation that we have of ourselves or others have of us. And these are often thought of in the science as primary emotions. And what can be really helpful is to ask ourselves, if anger was protecting a vulnerable primary emotion, what would that emotion be for me right now? And to maybe see that there could be more to your anger under the surface than what's happening above the surface. Okay, so I promised you that we would do 5 steps of a toolkit for exactly how to handle anger. I'm kind of going to do like a blow by blow of when anger flares up in your relationship. Say you're angry at your partner or they are angry at you. And I've written this down into a worksheet. I've kind of translated this into a downloadable PDF worksheet that you can grab. It's in the show notes. Go and grab that if it would be helpful to see this written down, and maybe to actually journal and work through each of the 5 steps to really get it into the front of your brain where you can recall it usefully in a moment where you experience anger. So step number 1 is the idea that you need radical permission to feel the emotion, but not to indulge the behavior. It's kind of what I started off saying in this session, that sometimes we need that permission that it's okay to be angry. We'll kind of need to give ourselves a bit of a pep talk and say, Naomi, anger is normal and healthy. It is okay for you to feel angry. That doesn't mean, however, that you can throw caution to the wind. You can abandon yourself and your values and just enact your anger any way you want to. And those 2 things are both really helpful value statements that we can make to ourselves. So even before we feel the anger, and maybe certainly in those initial moments of recognizing anger in our body, then that sense of permission that it is okay to feel what you feel. You cannot be made wrong for having emotions. In fact, the more you tune into them and listen to them, the more they will be useful to you in living a healthy and a fully expressed life. So that's step number 1. Maybe even now, just kind of make yourself a mental note. It is okay to feel anger. I'm not wrong for feeling anger, but I'm going to get better and better at knowing how to handle it. And then step 2 is to catch the body's warning signs. There are similarities between how anger shows up in our body, and you can learn to identify the tells in your body, even as they are only subtly there, or there's a sign that kind of anger is coming. So think about sort of how the energy feels in your body of anger. I mean, maybe you kind of bristle, maybe your shoulders go up, or your face tightens, your jaw sets, maybe your brow furrows. Perhaps it starts in your belly. Maybe you feel like tightening in your belly, or a rush of heat through your body. Maybe your fists tighten. Maybe you get pain. The tension might result in pain or stiffness somewhere in your body. You think about what happens mentally. Often it's like a kind of narrowing, focus, speeding up. People use the language of red mist. This kind of suggests heat and intensity and focus. Notice when that's happening in your mind. And then also, what do the emotions feel like? Is it that you feel irritation or frustration, or you can feel perhaps even hot rages? And naming that for you will be as unique and individual as you are. When I think of anger, so I'm kind of focusing in right now on what anger feels like in my body. I know I can feel it in my palms, and that sort of almost like instinct to curl my hands into a fist. I often feel it there first. So it'll be different for you. And just even now visualizing that, tuning into it in your body, even if you're not feeling angry, tuning into what that's like in your body will give you some language and a few indicators of how you can spot it in your body. So that's step number 2. Then step number 3 is to take a pause, to kind of go inside, to connect with yourself. Anger spikes rapidly, and it often asks for an immediate discharge, through aggressive movements, through getting loud, through, sending daggers through our eyes. And just knowing that you don't have to discharge it immediately, and you're kind of taking a micro pause, even if that's just a few seconds, maybe up to 90 seconds of focusing on your breathing, allowing your body to feel it, naming that this is, I'm angry. Oh, I'm angry. And really hunkering in with yourself in that moment. So you really are resisting the urge to immediately discharge. We're going to come onto that in a couple of steps. But you're recognizing that you're being activated in your anger. Now, when it comes to emotions, I like to say emotion is energy in motion, emotion. Emotions move through us, all kinds of emotions, like a wave. So they come, they rise, they rise, they rise, they peak, and they fall, fall, fall. When we're sensing that surge of a difficult emotion, particularly, grief or anger, it can be tempting to feel like we'll get lost in it. But 100% of your angry reactions have risen, peaked, and then fallen. You don't stay permanently angry. So it can be worth knowing this conceptually so that when we feel that, particularly if we're the kind of person that will minimize or resist or push away anger, won't engage it, then remembering that happens with our emotions. They are like a wave, and a bit like a surfer, we want to hang on to our surfboard so we can ride the wave, we can move through it and go with the energy of the emotion and allow it, not resist. Remember, we talked about suffering equals pain or anger times resistance, but hang on to our surfboard. So this step is kind of, bracing ourselves to ride the wave, taking a pause, allowing ourselves to be interrupted. Maybe anger comes that you get triggered by something. It just is internally triggered, and you remember, or you see something you recognize, or a dream comes to your mind, or you see somebody's face flash through your mind, and that triggers the anger. And it may not be at a convenient moment where you've got time for this, but everybody has a second or two to connect with their breath, to take a pause, and to really drop down and in to experience this energy moving through your body. So that's step number 3, take a pause. Now, step number 4 is to move to discharge anger. Anger produces a lot of adrenaline in your body. And if you don't actively move this energy through your muscles, it's going to leak out in some of the ways we've already talked about in this episode. And so something that gets you active is going to be part of step 4, moving in discharge of the emotion of anger. There was a time recently when I've told you before that I'm not very good at handling anger. I'm one of those people that minimizes it and then it leaks out. I would become moody and withdrawn and kind of irritable with Nick, my husband, if I was angry at him. And through lots of my own work and through focusing on that, I have tried to do these exact steps that I'm talking you through now. And I had a moment not long ago where it was first thing in the morning. So it was a time where perhaps it was easier for me to do something immediately to discharge the anger, when I noticed I was feeling so rageful and so upset that I got on the treadmill and said to myself, I'm not coming off until I've calmed down. And it was 20 minutes of fast walking on the treadmill that discharged that energy for me. And often when I read the research, 20 minutes is a good amount of time for you to metabolize and to convert that energy of the adrenaline rush into movement. But other things you might do, classically screaming into a pillow. I know people who have got into the shower, and there's something about being in the water that enables them to engage and move that anger through them. Going to the car, shutting the door, screaming, taking a walk, going outside. It's incredible motivation for intense workout. You could have a 20-minute on fire, hit energetic exercise if you are using anger to burn it through your body through movement and convert it into something positive. It does take tremendous amount of self-control and willpower, but don't forget that this part of your brain can be exercised and grown. And the more you use it, the more it will strengthen, and those connections will become more and more automatic. So you'll catch yourself realizing, I'm breathing through my anger. I'm focusing my energy on something I can control instead of lashing out. And then let's talk about step 5. When you have moved through those 4 steps, and this might be immediately or this might be at some point later, then expressing your anger is definitely got to be part of completing that cycle, completing the wave. And when you come to do this, really notice the difference between expressing your emotion and attacking somebody's character. So we often talk in couples work about using I statements. So I feel really upset, angry, and enraged with you would be an example of expressing emotion. You are a monster and I hate you would be an attack on someone's character. And both of them have that intensity of anger, but one of them puts your partner at risk of their own nervous system spike and their own getting triggered. As John Gottman talks about in his research, contempt is sulfuric acid for relationships. If your anger becomes an attack on your partner, you are destroying the very foundations of their trust in you and breaking down the relationship. So avoiding contempt and focusing on expressing your emotions, own it. You take responsibility for your feelings. Nobody makes you feel anything. You might not feel like you have control over them, but you can take responsibility for them. I feel angry. I sometimes say to my husband, I'm angry with you, not at you. And that seems to help me separate my emotion from who he is as somebody worthy of respect. And of course, you might want to express yourself by writing this in a journal, by speaking to a trusted friend, or it's a wonderful thing to bring to therapy. You know, when do I feel angry? How does anger feel in my body? How good am I at converting that anger into something I can use? Be a positive change maker in my life and relationships. So it may not be that you are always talking to your partner about your anger, but finding some expression is going to be a healthy resolution to anger in your body. So those are the 5 steps. I hope there was something in there that you could use. Remember, every different person is going to have a different way of feeling and then metabolizing anger in their body. And I just want you to underscore this is about you learning yourself. Because the more you are able to be connected to yourself, the more you're a good partner to yourself, the more you can understand and invite your spouse or your partner to love you really well and stay connected to you, even when you have moments that are challenging or difficult or involve intense emotions like anger. So we're going to leave this episode here. We're going to wrap up, reminding ourselves that the goal is not to skate across life, never feeling irritated with each other. The goal, of course, is to be fully expressed and to find ways to stay with ourselves and to use our anger as a driving force for change and a catalyst for understanding ourselves better. I'd love to hear your thoughts or responses to this session episode of the podcast. You can email me at team@Naomi Light and maybe send me topics or questions. Maybe something that you ask me on email could be the subject for a future episode of Rewiring Love. But until I see you next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.